Hello and welcome to MCU&Me, where I walk us through the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe chronologically. Following the Sacred Timeline, with the benefit of hindsight, I'll point out nods and references along the way to see how all of these projects are intertwined. We covered a lot in the first episode, where we started our journey at the very birth of our timeline, all the way up to the 1800s. In this episode, we're skipping a few decades in order to spend most of our time focusing on the 1940s. But first, there are a few key events worth pointing out, starting with the birth of Steve Rogers on, you guessed it, July 4, 1918. That is, of course, America's ass.
There was an idea to bring together a group of remarkable people to see if we could become something more. So when they needed us, we could fight the battles
that they never could.
Steve grows up in the 1920s with one James Buchanan Bucky Barnes in Brooklyn, New York City. His father died in the Great War and his mother unfortunately had many health problems. Bucky, being older and stronger, was the one who looked out for Steve. The two view themselves as brothers, and there's nothing that can change that, not even time. Before we continue with the crazy adventures of these two Brooklyn boys, something interesting is happening in 1931. Some agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. have arrived at this time from the future. Yes, if you ask me, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is canon to the Sacred Timeline. When the show started, everything lined up with the movie releases. It was wonderful. When we started to get near the end of the Infinity Saga, that's where the show said, fine, we'll do our own thing, and started to introduce their own time travel stories. I won't get into Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. events too much, I just think it's worth acknowledging certain moments, like this one. Moving on, because at this point, S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't even exist. We turn our attention to the Eternal Kingo, who has become bored over the centuries of lying low after they successfully eradicated the deviants. He became enchanted by the cinematic arts, a real theater kid, you could say, although he was never a kid. As the 1930s roll around, Hollywood has begun to take notice of a rising star on the other side of the globe, as India's Bollywood productions are doing extremely well. You see, Kingo decided to step into the spotlight, but came up with a clever lie to cover the fact that he doesn't age. At this point in time, he's pretending to be Raj Kingodeva, the son of the great Kingo, who is just him. He'll continue this ruse as the generations advance, making movies and basking in the fame. We jump to 1942, where total war is raging across Europe. A Nazi doctor by the name of Johann Jingleheimer Schmidt, his name is my name too, assumes command of Hydra, the deep science division of the Nazis. While Hitler expects this division to produce more efficient and advanced weapons of war, Schmidt is obsessed with wielding the power of the gods himself. You see, he used to work with Dr. Abraham Erskine, who is actively developing a super soldier serum. Before the serum was ready, and if you ask Erskine, before the man was also ready, Schmidt injected himself with it, expecting heightened superhuman strength and abilities. He got his wish, but it also came with a curse. His skin basically peeled off of his face, revealing a red skull beneath, resulting in a new moniker, the Red Skull. In March of 1942, Schmidt leads his forces to invade the town of Tonsberg, Norway, where he gains possession of the Jewel of Odin's treasure room, a small glowing blue cube known as the Tesseract. Remember, we covered in episode 1 that Odin came back to hide the Tesseract there. Why Tonsberg? Well, maybe because it was the only place he knew well enough, having spent some time there in the year 965 fighting the frost giants who had invaded. Little does Schmidt know that the Space Stone is hiding inside of the Tesseract. What he does know, and all he cares about, is the limitless power the cube possesses and now grants him. He begins working on harnessing that power into new weaponry with Dr. Arnim Zola and declares himself and his mission independent from Hitler. Later, in 1943, over in British-occupied India, a few exiles from the newer dimension known as the Clandestines are exploring a destroyed temple, as one does. The temple is marked by the symbol of the 10 rings. Underneath all the rubble, they find a bangle that gives its wearer the ability to harness light energy. The Clandestines, often mistaken as jinn by the humans, believe this can help them open a portal back to their home dimension of Noor. Before they can use it though, British soldiers scatter the group. Their leader, Aisha, with the bangle in her possession, takes shelter with a rose farmer named Hassan. They fall in love, naturally, get married, and have a daughter named Sana. Now, with ties to this dimension, Aisha is no longer thinking about leaving. The history of how the bangle ended up buried in a temple that was marked by the 10 rings is unclear. I assume Wenwu used his fancy bracelets to bury this other fancy bracelet, so its power cannot be used to challenge his own. Now, it's worth noting that the bangle has a twin, but its location is a mystery that won't be revealed for some time. Just know that it's not on Earth, unlike so many powerful artifacts that appear to be. Moving on to June 14th, 1943, and Steve Rogers, not quite 25 years of age, attempts yet again to enlist in the US Army and is rejected for being a 90-pound asthmatic. Mind you, this is after he was getting his butt kicked in an alley, stubbornly refusing to give up because he can, of course, do this all day, only to be rescued by Bucky, who is shipping overseas with the 107th Infantry Regiment the next day. Before Bucky leaves, the two hit the town and go out with a few girls at the World Exposition of Tomorrow. Howard Stark is showing off a prototype of a flying car that will be all the rage in just a few short years. The prototype at least managed to get off the ground and hover for a few seconds. I wonder why he stopped developing the technology. Not interested in the future, but rather the immediate and present dangers, Steve spots another army recruitment tent and attempts to once more enlist under another fake name. Bucky begins to argue with him because if he's caught, he'll get into a lot of trouble and he can't fathom why Steve would even risk such a thing. Steve believes it's his duty, just like every other citizen, to do his part and that he has no right to sacrifice less than the countless soldiers already laying their lives down to fight the Nazis. None other than Dr. Abraham Erskine overhears this argument and considers Steve for something unique. Yes, that Dr. Erskine who worked with Johann Schmidt, aka Red Skull. You see, Erskine defected to the United States. As he later explains to Steve, people often forget that the first country Hitler invaded was his own. Not all Germans believed in Hitler's evil ways, and not all could get out or had anywhere else to go. Dr. Erskine did manage to flee and continued to develop his super soldier serum for the American government and is now looking for viable candidates for the program. He is intent not to repeat the same mistake he made with Schmidt. There are already so many big men fighting this war, he tells Steve as he explains that he's looking for qualities of strength beyond the physical. Maybe what we need now is the little guy. Of course, what he means is that his serum amplifies what is already inside a person. Good becomes great, and bad becomes worse. Dr. Erskine overlooks Steve's identity fraud and enlists him as top tier into the Strategic Scientific Reserve's Super Soldier program at Camp Leahy, an army base in New Jersey. This is where Steve first meets British agent Peggy Carter, who is supervising recruits on behalf of the program's director, Colonel Chester Phillips. Over the next week, Steve goes through Army boot camp and fails miserably at most courses compared to his fellow recruits who are in peak physical condition. He shows, however, that it's not all about brawn and that being clever can also come in handy in the field, something about working smarter, not harder. Perhaps most importantly, Steve shows that he's selfless and ready to lay his life down to protect others as he unknowingly demonstrates by throwing himself atop a grenade in order to save those around him. The grenade might be a fake, but the heroics are certainly real. By this point, Dr. Erskine has finally convinced Colonel Phillips of his decision to use Steve as the first recipient of the serum. The procedure takes place on June 22, 1943, and it transforms Steve Rogers into the super soldier we all know. Tragically, Hydra, also in attendance, detonates a bomb and shoots Dr. Erskine, killing him. In the chaos, the last of the serum is destroyed, and with the death of its creator, the only man who knew the formula, so is any hope of creating more super soldiers. Super he may be, but a soldier he is not. Steve is put to use as a morale-boosting propaganda tool rather than a fighter in the war. He is sent on tours all over the US to raise money for the war effort. They give him the stage name of Captain America and put him all over posters and movie theaters. Eventually, Steve is sent to bases in Europe in an attempt to cheer up the troops. On November 3, 1943, while performing in Italy, 5 miles away from the battlefront, he overhears that a large group of American soldiers have been captured by Hydra near Azzano. These soldiers are from the 107th, meaning Bucky could be among them. So Steve disobeys orders and goes to rescue his friend, with the help of Agent Carter and Howard Stark. He not only rescues Bucky and many of the 107th, but they destroy Hydra's base on their way out. From this day on, Steve becomes a warrior. His unit is known as the Howling Commandos, and they go on mission after mission, taking down Hydra agents wherever they can. Sadly, sometime in 1944, during a train mission that leads to the capture of Dr. Arnim Zola, Bucky is thrown off of the moving train and falls down an icy void into a mountain canyon. As they are unable to recover his body, he is presumed dead. We jump ahead a little bit to March of 1945. Captain America and his soldiers finally locate and attack the Red Skull's base of operations, and just in time as Schmidt takes off on his warplane, the Valkyrie, loaded with Tesseract-powered bombs that he means to drop on all major cities in the United States. Colonel Phillips and Agent Carter steal Schmidt's car and pick Steve up to race down the runway in order to catch up to the plane. Before Steve makes the jump, Peggy pulls him back, and then they kiss. During their fight on the plane, Red Skull picks up the Tesseract after it had been hit, and a column of energy erupts out of it, sucking up Schmidt and teleporting him somewhere far off in space. You'll recall that the Tesseract is housing the Space Stone. Teleporting is one of its perks. That will come up again. Also, we won't see the Red Skull for some time, but he is still alive, technically. Unfortunately, during their super soldier fighting, the Valkyrie's flight controls are damaged. The plane is moving too quickly on a set course for New York, carrying all of the bombs. There's no time to land it before it gets too close to a populated area. To prevent the death of millions of innocents, Steve steers the damaged ship down into a polar ice cap, where it remains buried for decades to come. Just before the crash, Steve managed to get Peggy on the radio and promised to meet her again so that she could teach him how to dance. While Steve defeats Hydra with his ultimate sacrifice, the war continues. On August 6, 1945, the United States detonates the first atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima, killing over 100,000 people, most of whom were civilians. In the aftermath of the first bomb, the Eternal Phastos weeps at all the loss. For eons, his ingenuity and innovations had helped people develop new technologies and thrive. Now he's overwhelmed with sadness at the dark path humanity has taken. He can't help but to feel partially responsible. Of course, one wasn't enough, and days later, another atomic bomb is dropped on Nagasaki. The war finally comes to an end in September. After the war, Howard Stark continues his work with the US government, solidifying Stark Enterprises as its main defense manufacturer. Stark personally scans for life around Steve's last known coordinates but can't find Captain America's body. He does find, however, the Tesseract sitting at the bottom of the ocean. He recovers it to later be studied by a new organization within the government that he'll soon help start. Now, the technology of this time is quite limited, so not much is made in the way of advancements or even understanding of the Tesseract. I know Hydra was able to harness a fraction of its power for weapons, so maybe the government decided it was too dangerous. Nah, they just couldn't crack it. Not even with Dr. Zola's help, apparently, since he ends up captured by the US government. But more on that soon. Anyway, 1946 is a busy year for Agent Carter. After the war ends, she continues her work with the Strategic Scientific Reserve as a codebreaker and data analyst alongside one Agent Flynn, who is reluctant to put her back in the field after the loss of Steve. She doesn't remain in the office for too long, however, as one night she goes out on a mission by herself to retrieve a rogue deadly chemical weapon before it can fall into the wrong hands. Another mission takes her from the New York division to the West Coast, where she reunites and works with the West Coast SSR chief, Daniel Souza. The two have a long working history and eventually grow close. Not long after that, Peggy is recruited by none other than Howard Stark and Colonel Phillips to join them in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., and become the founding director of, you guessed it, the Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement and Logistics Division, SHIELD. Coming back around to Dr. Arnim Zola, having decided jail isn't that fun, he agrees to help the US government, specifically SHIELD, in exchange for some niceties. Operation Paperclip is one of the ways he helps out, but little does anyone know he is still clinging to his Hydra ways and worships his former master, Red Skull. Like a parasite, he begins to rebuild Hydra from within SHIELD's very own operations. Hydra's reach and impact will go unnoticed for decades to come. Before we continue, a quick word from our sponsor. Ever wanted to be part of something bigger? Join SHIELD and help protect the world from everything from alien invasions to supervillains. You'll get access to cutting-edge tech, top-tier training, and work alongside some of the best agents on the planet. Whether it's stopping Hydra or saving the multiverse, SHIELD is looking for heroes like you. Ready for the challenge? Apply now at shieldrecruitment.agency. Spots are limited, so don't wait. The world needs you. It's the shield between you and chaos. Don't just watch the world be saved. Be part of the team that does it. Warning, SHIELD accepts and rated so low that even superheroes struggle to get in, and their limited spots were snapped so fast that you could say Hail Hydra. Now, back to the show. One of the earliest projects Hydra starts in 1947 is one that involves brainwashing and training a team of shadow assassins. On the team is none other than Bucky Barnes, whose body had been recovered, arm rebuilt, and mind basically wiped. They keep this new winter soldier in cryogenic storage when his services aren't required and wake him up for missions he has no choice but to comply with. This too will go on for decades. Alright, we shift gears now to the other side of the world where a different kind of evil superpower is hard at work messing shit up. I speak, of course, of the British colonizers in India who, and this is an oversimplification of events, got tired of not being able to tell apart who is Muslim and who is not. So their clever solution is the partition of India and the creation of Pakistan, where all the Muslims are forced to move. This partition takes place on August 14, 1947, and amidst the chaos, a clandestine known as Najma has finally tracked Aisha to where she lives. Aisha is unwilling to turn over the bangle, so she and Hassan rush to the train station with their younger daughter Sana in an attempt to escape the clandestine people. Najma ends up catching Aisha at the station and stabs her. As she's dying, Aisha connects with the bangle which, when it falls off of her, summons her great-granddaughter, bringing her to the past. Kamala Khan, wearing the same bangle, sees her great-grandmother die. And she helps locate her grandmother, Sana, currently a little girl who has gotten lost in the mad rush to board the trains to flee India. Kamala uses her light powers from the bangle to help Sana locate her father, an act that Sana will remember in a fanciful way, and a story she will tell her family many times, only to be shrugged off as the overactive imagination of a scared little girl. Kamala returns back to her time in 2025, but we remain on the sacred timeline and jump instead to 1949. You see, Tony Stark, son of Howard Stark, isn't even born yet, but at some point in the future, he invents a means of time travel. We'll get there in a future episode, but I need to give you at least that bit of context because Steve Rogers uses that technology for an important mission, one I'll also say for when it's relevant. But wait, didn't Steve die in that plane crash? No, not exactly. If Red Skull can survive being teleported to another planet, Captain America can survive an ice bath. Benefits of the super soldier serum, I suppose. Anyway, a future Steve, upon completing his important mission, decides not to return to his present timeline, but instead he travels further back to 1949, where he stays with Peggy after reuniting and finally sharing that dance he promised her. Aww. Now, the fact that a future version of Steve Rogers travels back in time to 1949 and stays there to share a life with Peggy, presumably, and grow old, only to reveal himself to his Avengers team the day he left can hurt your brain a little bit. At the very least, you have to accept that Steve decides to not intervene at all and allows the crazy events we're going to get to just play out. So remember that, I guess, as we go on, or you know what, forget the fact that Steve stuck around because it doesn't really make much sense. It should have created what's called a branch timeline, but I'll save that rant for a different sort of episode. All you need to know now is that he came back to dance with Peggy and that shit is super cute. Around the year 1950, the US government decides to reactivate its super soldier program, trying their darndest to recreate Dr. Erskine's formula that made Steve Rogers transform into Captain America. While Dr. Erskine's procedure was run on a willing subject, this time around the testing is not so voluntary. With complete disregard for basic rights and human life, so business as usual, the US government experiments with multiple variations of the formula on, wanna guess? Black American soldiers who aren't told what the tests are for. I remind you, we are in the 50s. Of all the misinformed soldiers, only one transforms successfully and is stable, avoiding unspeakable pain and even death from the failed attempts. That soldier is Isaiah Bradley. He becomes a weapon for the military and is sent on various missions, including one in 1951 that pins him up against a mysterious Winter Soldier. Everyone that had fought this guy before never made it back, so the government sends their only successful attempt at a super soldier of their own. The two fight just outside of Seoul, South Korea, and Bradley manages to take off half of the Winter Soldier's metal arm before the enemy escapes. Mind you, this is during the Korean War, and in an effort to provide further aid to South Korea, the US military sends any surviving super soldiers to join the war, despite their instability. Several of them are captured by enemy forces, and rather than try to rescue them, Bradley discovers that senior officials are planning on bombing a POW camp to kill their own men, rather than risk any information or evidence of the super soldier program from being discovered. Bradley, of course, won't stand for this and stages his own unsanctioned rescue mission. Sound familiar? It's not unlike Steve's actions back in 1943 when he rescued Bucky and the remaining survivors of the 107th. However, rather than being honored for his valiant actions, Bradley is imprisoned. Eventually, his fellow soldiers succumb to the effects of the failed experiments, leaving Bradley as the last living subject of the super soldier program. For the next 30 years, the government keeps him locked up both to keep the project a secret and to run more involuntary tests, all in an effort to figure out why it worked on him alone. Meanwhile, Isaiah's wife, Faith, works tirelessly to reach her husband, to no avail. To stop her pursuit, the government concocts yet another lie and tells her that Isaiah has died in prison. Sadly, Faith passes away before knowing the truth about her husband and what the government did to him. Bradley's story doesn't end here, however, and will come back to him once he's out of prison later on the Sacred Timeline. We shift gears and our attention to the year 1955, where more wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff is happening with our future versions of some Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Remember, they got sent back in time to 1931. Well, their spaceship's time engine thing is malfunctioning, spitting them out at seemingly random points on the Sacred Timeline. The next jump is July 22nd, 1955. This is the day that Agent Daniel Souza dies. Phil Coulson and his team end up near Area 51 by an SSR facility. One of the agents, Gemma Simmons, pretends to be Peggy Carter, but her identity fraud is short-lived when Agent Souza confronts her. Now, I'm not going to get into why these agents are here and what they're doing, but Coulson realizes what happens on this date and decides to intervene. He takes Sousa's place during a drop mission, and his would-be killer thinks he successfully killed Agent Sousa when, in reality, it's Phil Coulson he shoots. Okay, a few things to unpack here. First, why kill Sousa? Well, Sousa actually suspects that Hydra has come back and taken roots inside the SSR and S.H.I.E.L.D., so Hydra wants him dead. And while they technically do not kill him before he could get word out to Howard Stark or Director Peggy, Phil's team takes Sousa with them on their spaceship, effectively removing him from the timeline and thus preserving the Sacred Timeline in the process. At least, that's how I make sense of it. And this is how you can give someone a different life while keeping the timeline intact. I'm looking at you, old man Steve. Okay, I said I wasn't going there, and I'm not. Secondly, does Phil die in Sousa's place? Yes and no. You see, and bear with me here for a moment, Phil does die much later on the Sacred Timeline. Twice, actually. But the second time he dies, he is brought back to life as a life model decoy, or LMD. Basically, his consciousness transfers into a robot body that looks exactly like him. So this LMD can take a few bullets to fake the death of Agent Sousa for the timeline to remain on course. From everyone's perspective, Sousa dies, but in reality, he goes with the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as they jump again in time. Since Hydra's growing reach is not revealed by Agent Sousa, they're able to continue their devious efforts in secret. Throughout the 50s and 60s, they continue to use various resources, including the Winter Soldier, to expand their influence and shape global events. One of Hydra's core beliefs is that humanity can't be trusted with its own freedom, basically an excuse for oppression and authoritarian rule. They strategically create chaos, war, political conflicts, and economic unrest all over the world to make people feel unsafe so that they will willingly sacrifice their liberties in exchange for security. In 1963, a Soviet physicist named Anton Vanko defects to the United States. He ends up working with Howard Stark, and the two combine their areas of expertise to develop prototypes for what will become the arc reactor, a powerful and incredibly efficient power source. Nick Fury will later explain that their goal had been to make the nuclear reactor look like a AAA battery. They aren't able to finish their work, however, as Vanko is suspected of attempting to sell information about their work on the criminal market. Stark cuts ties with Vanko and personally ensures he is deported back to the Soviet Union where, they don't take too kindly to those who defect, especially to the US. Alright, that's it for this episode. You see, a reasonable span of time covered, nothing like episode 1. Thanks for listening, and tune into episode 3 where we pick up in the 1970s at a certain army base where our favorite captain and Man of Iron visit from the future. You heard me right.